Excellent. Well, Beth, thank you for setting this up. You and the library team have been great to work with for years, and this is a peculiar time, so I appreciate the flexibility to even give this a go while most people are home and working a little bit differently. It's fun to be with people in person, but I also do a lot of online training and coaching and presenting like this, so I'm also comfortable to do it this way, and we appreciate you guys for joining us today. What we want to talk about today is organizing your photos, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of different software. We could talk about printed photos that need scanned. We could talk about scanning slides and negatives. We could talk about digital photos. There's all sorts of combinations there. And if you have questions about them, I can probably answer questions about any of those topics. But let's focus today on just organizing our digital photos. That's what most of us have the most of, and it's probably the most kind of overwhelming for most of us because we have so many photos in so many places, but we're not always sure what to do with them. So let me tell you a little bit about how I deal with them, and then we'll get into the rest of the presentation. So a couple of highlights. So this session is really for anybody interested in preserving and organizing and ultimately enjoying photos. Organizing photos probably doesn't sound like the most fun thing, but and mostly because it's tedious, but the payoff is great because when it's time to celebrate, when it's time for somebody to graduate or get married or retired, you can find those photos and share them and enjoy them, which is kind of the reason we took them in the first place. I have a 5-step workflow. I'm a professional photo organizer. I do this for myself, and I work with clients around the world organizing their photo archives. So I have a 5-step process, and I just want to give you that for context. So we start with gathering, whether it's digital photos or physical photos. It's helpful to gather everything in one place so we can make heads or tails of it. We understand how big the project is. We understand how many duplicates we have in double prints, because that way we don't have to spend time on that, right? So we start with gathering. From there, we preserve things. On the digital side, that means maybe converting to more modern file formats. And with old prints, it's scanning them. With old videotapes, it's converting them. The next phase is organizing. Once you've got all this together, what do we do with it? And that's what I'll focus most of today's session on. You'll see some concepts, and then you'll see it in action as well. And then this tees us up to be able to share them. That's really the goal, to enjoy and share them again. And then the 5th phase is kind of an ongoing thing because we will continue to take photos. But what's nice is once you've gone through the first 3 or 4 phases of this process, then you have a system. You don't have to make it up again every time. You have a system, and then you can maintain your photos with the new things, with the new photos you take, or the old photos that you keep finding, you can put them into the same system. So those are the 5 steps that I take with every project. And again, the organized phase is where we will focus today. So with that in mind, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and why I love this so much. So I have a pretty extensive background in training and writing about technology. So I wrote all of those books you see on the screen. I've edited these books and about 10 or 15 more from a technical perspective, mostly around Adobe software and graphic design, things like that. I've recorded training videos with all of these companies. And I was one of the first Adobe certified training providers and certified experts in the world. I've actually worked for Adobe for more than 20 years. And I also have my own business called Chaos to Memories. I work locally here around Wheaton and Glen Ellen. And this is just a little snapshot of what I did last year. I organized over 9 million photos for my clients. They came from 540 different camera models. And I saved my clients 9.5 terabytes of storage, of hard drive storage, because most of us, at least for the clients that I work with, about 45% of their photos are duplicates. You might be above average or below average, but we tend to have a lot of duplicates. We don't even realize that. We take photos, we share them, we copy them, and I wish I could see your faces in a room right now, because many of you would probably be grinning, because that's pretty common. So by organizing and deduplicating all that stuff, when we get to the organizing phase, which is what we're going to talk about today, then it's less overwhelming, right? We're not organizing the same duplicate file twice. We're only going to do it once, and that saves time. And needless to say, I mentioned saving time. That's really important because these projects are big. You've probably accumulated photos for decades. And if you have a large family collection of prints, that might be generations, maybe 100 or more years of photos. And so it's going to be tedious. And so the more efficiently we can do that, the better. Alrighty, so let's talk. Actually, one second. I'm going to skip these slides. Sorry, they're all great, but for the sake of time, let me go back here. So here's the end goal of a photo organization project. The end goal in my mind is 4 things. First of all, your photos are sorted. So what I mean by that is, you know, as I mentioned, all the duplicates are deleted. They're all in one place. You can just start to make sense of it. The second thing that I like to aim for a photo organization project is that they're searchable. So having them all in one place is a good place to start, but it's really important to search. Many of us use a phone. I'll hold my phone up here. We'll have our phone and we'll scroll through things, right? Over and over again. I have a photo I want to show you, and we scroll and we scroll. What we're doing there is browsing, and it doesn't work very well, especially when you have thousands of photos. It almost gets to the point it's a little silly and embarrassing. Instead, with what we call keywords or tags, you can search your photos just like you search the internet. So in this case, I wanted to find pictures of beaches in France. And so I just did a search, and that's what I found. Or we'll do another example. This is me as a child and my sisters in Halloween costumes, right? You want to celebrate some funny memories, Halloween costumes. Here's baby portraits from my family. Here's lighthouses in North Carolina. Like, these are all real searches, real photos from my family photo archives. And when you have done the organization that I'm going to tell you about, you can search and find your photos. So when it's time to celebrate somebody's 50th wedding anniversary, or their retirement, or their college graduation, you can find those. Here's more pictures of me and my sisters at the beach, right? All sorts of fun examples. The next part that I think is important is that you want your photos to be secure and shareable. So secure means they're all in one place, they're backed up. So even if something bad happened to your computer, whether there was a technology error or a human error, you'd be able to recover. And it's also important that it be shareable. Again, and searching is a key part of that. All right, so if that's the end goal, let's talk a little bit about how we get there. So give me one second. Give me one moment. Sorry for the detour. I have a mix of slides here that I want to make sure I show you the right ones. I have different versions of this, and I want to make sure we're looking at the right one. Sorry for the detour there. Yeah, here we go. Perfect. Thanks for your patience. Alrighty, so in terms of the kinds of tags that you would add to photos to make them searchable, as you can see here on the list, in the list on the left, there's a lot of options. Let me go back. Let me just show you. Let me switch to another slide, just as a kind of conceptual example. Let's look at a couple of these real quick. So I really prefer live interaction here, which I know is hard to do at the moment, but let me just kind of narrate this. What you see on my screen is a screenshot from the website Yelp. It's a popular restaurant review site, and this is one of my favorite restaurants in New York City called the Mermaid Inn. And the reason I'm using this example, it's from the internet, but it uses what we call metadata or keywords to describe something. So in this case, some of the fields, if you just think through this with me a little bit, we have the name of the restaurant, we have the star rating, we have how expensive it is, we have what kind of food they serve, the location, the phone number, things like that. So those are keywords or metadata for a restaurant. Let's look at another example or two. This is an example from United.com, right? So this would be a flight that I might take from Chicago to Atlanta. It's been a while since I've flown, right? But if I was going to fly, you know, this would include information about the origination, the destination, the time, the flight number, the length of the flight, things like that. Here's an example from IMDb. This is a website about TV shows and movies. So this is one of my favorite episodes of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone series. From season 2 in 1961, and this includes like the genre up here, the length. Burgess Meredith was one of the actors in this episode, things like that. So again, these are just descriptions of different things, of airline flights, of TV shows. Let's do one more example just to reinforce this. This is a camera I use and I really like, and it's just a screenshot from Amazon. So here it tells me Canon makes this camera. This is the model number. These are some of the things about like resolution and features and price and things like that. So these are examples of keywords or metadata that we interact with every day. We may not think of them as keywords or metadata, but we interact with things like this on a daily basis on the internet. And you might not realize it, but let's jump back down here. You may not realize it, but we can do the same thing with photographs. And that's where this metadata or keywords comes in. So I'm going to talk to you conceptually about the kinds of tags we can do here on the left, and then I'm going to show you in real time how you might do that. A couple of kind of warnings about this technology. One is that there are lots of software applications out there. There's stuff on your phone, there's stuff on the web, there's stuff you download for your computer. Many of them add some kind of keywords or let you do that. The only catch is you want to make sure you use software that supports like industry standards for tags. So for that, I use Adobe Lightroom because it supports industry standard tags, and very importantly, it embeds them inside the files. It doesn't store them in the cloud, it doesn't store them somewhere else. But if I take a keyword like beach, if we go on vacation and I use the word beach, and I add that to my photos, it actually saves it inside the photo. That's important because, and I hesitate, I feel like I'm going to burst somebody's bubble here, but if you use other software like Apple Photos or Google Photos, those services are nice, and in many cases they actually automatically add keywords, which is pretty cool, and they're pretty accurate. The problem is those keywords, they don't get embedded inside your files. So if you ever decide to use a different kind of phone or computer, or those companies ever stop being interested in that software or change their mind or start charging or whatever, then you would lose all that organization, all those keywords, all those faces, poof, it all goes away. So that's like the dirty secret of the free services out there. So just to put that out there, I don't want anybody to be surprised. Maybe you already are, but I don't want you to be more surprised. It's important to use software that really supports these standards. So Adobe Lightroom is a paid piece of software that does it. It costs about $10 a month. Adobe Bridge is a free one that will do it. There are others, but most of the software that does this kind of the right way will cost you a little bit. But again, these projects are so big and so tedious that I only want to do it once. And so I think it's worth an investment. So all of that said, all that explanation, let me tell you the kinds of tags or keywords or metadata. By the way, those are all synonyms. Tags, keywords, metadata, pretty much all synonyms. I might use them interchangeably. And let me show you the key kinds of information that I put inside a file. The first one, I have some good news. The first one is free. What I mean by that is when I take a photograph, this was a photograph of my son running cross country last fall, and the first piece of information is capture time. Any camera, any digital camera, I should say, your phone, a digital camera, an SLR, they capture the time automatically. And that's what you see here. It doesn't mean it's always right. Okay, so phones generally are accurate. Camera phones are generally accurate because they get their date and time from the cell towers. But if you have a digital camera, make sure you set your time and date correctly. It does matter. So then when you want to search by date, the capture time will be right. So capture time comes for free. You can change it if it's wrong, but that kind of comes for free. Let's talk about some other things. So names. In addition to time, the number one thing that people search for is people. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for their child, their mother, their grandmother, whatever it is. They want to find people that are important to them. So these are some of my family members and friends. And again, I use Lightroom to find the faces in a faster way and assign those faces using artificial intelligence. Just speeds up the process, because that would be something I'd want to search for. The next category here on the left is, and by the way, just for context, I'm going to run through these briefly and then we'll take a pause. Beth, you may see questions. I'll stop screen sharing. I'll come back to the chat room and just see if there's questions that we can talk about. But I'll run through the examples and then we can chat about it. So the next category is keywords. These are just things like events and places. I might add birthday, vacation, conceptual, like a vague term like beach, right? We went on a beach vacation. We went to the mountains. It was summer. It was snowing, things like that. Now you may notice that I added Utah and Zion National Park in this example. Those are places, right? And over here I see sublocation, city, state, country. Technically, like Zion National Park is a location, Utah is a state. You can double up on some of these. I'm not trying to make extra work for anybody, but you can sometimes put these words and keywords in multiple locations. And for example, if I went on a vacation to Paris, I would, city, the city is Paris, but I'd probably also add Paris as a keyword because it was kind of a big deal, right? We went to Paris. Like that was the whole trip. So it's okay if you double up there. You don't have to, but it's okay. Sublocation. This is interesting. This is an example of where I live. This is one of my photos. So sublocation is interesting because, especially for historical photos, when I'm scanning old photos, the more specific location, the better. I don't put grandma's house because, well, what happens when grandma doesn't live there anymore? That doesn't make sense. Or the farm. Lots of people have farms. Whose farm? Where is it? The more specific I can be here, the better. Because when I'm organizing photos, I'm not just organizing them for me. Ideally, I'm organizing them for my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids, so they can go back and see where their ancestors lived and grew up and went to college and things like that. So putting in a specific address, instead of Bob and Brenda's house, put, 412 Oak Street. And it helps me remember where that was taken. And then the rest of these are pretty self-explanatory. City is just the city, state, country. And one important note that you'll see in a moment is this kind of tags and keywords. You don't do this one photo at a time, right? If I had to do location, city, state, country, location, city, state, country over and over again, that'd be really tedious and you'd think I was crazy. But instead, you do this in batch, right? You take 50 photos at the 4th of July parade and you say, hey, this is all Glen Ellen, Illinois, US. Just takes a second. You don't have to do it over and over again. One other option, totally not necessary, but kind of fun, is GPS location. You can embed this. Many phones, right? If you have a smartphone, many phones embed the GPS by default, which is a cool way to see where you took a photo. And again, if this is a really memorable or important place, if you're visiting a relative's home or some location that's important to your family, it can be helpful to revisit those, because honestly, I have some photos from the early 1900s from my ancestors where I have a street address, but the street doesn't exist anymore, at least not by that name. Like, so much has changed that street literally doesn't exist. But if I had the GPS coordinates, I could have a fighting chance of finding that place and seeing if the home is there and things like that. Again, not required, but many of our photos include it from our digital phone cameras, and it can kind of be fun to embed that. The last couple things that I'll mention would be a photo credit. If you took the photo, you could just put a copyright or a creator statement in there. And even if you're not into photography, it can be helpful to, like in the creator field, say, from the photo archive of Adam and Cindy Pratt, right? Maybe you're not as technical as I am about this, but you can just give your photo some context, and you could do that on all your photos in like 5 seconds. Literally, you have 50,000 photos. you could just add, from the photo archive of so-and-so, just to give a little bit of context again to your family, your children, your grandchildren, things like that. And then the last piece of this that I try to do, I don't do this on every photo, but I try to do is give a caption. And a caption is just like a one sentence statement, kind of like a photo caption, like in a newspaper or a magazine, about what's going on in this photo. It's giving me context for the photo. So all these other examples, the capture time, the names, and the keywords, these are kind of like the ingredients. These are all the pieces. But the caption is a little bit like more like the recipe. It's like what was actually going on here. So one thing that's helpful is to think about your photos as if it was 100 years from now, and you wanted to look back on the photos and say, hey, what was going on? I see people standing in front of a building, but what is it? Is it a graduation? Is it a funeral? Is it a business opening? Is it, what is it? Maybe you were an architect. You designed the building. Who knows? Without a little bit of story that can be captured in the caption, the context can be lost. So that can be helpful. So I hope that's not too much too fast, but hopefully a good overview. Let me pause. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and maybe I'll come back to the chat pod. And if you guys have questions, I see there's a handful of folks in the room. So if you guys have any questions so far, just conceptually about tags as a way to organize your photos, could you guys put those in the chat pod and we could see what you're wondering about or what you want to learn about? Go ahead and take a minute to do that. And then once we see what's going on there, then we can switch back to some other software and I can show you how I actually do this and put it into practice.
While we're waiting to see if anyone types anything in, I actually have 2 points, only because I've heard you do this a couple times before.
Of course.
The first one is you did mention that you use Adobe Lightroom, and you said there are other softwares out there. Can you name 2 or 3 of those? And
yeah.
Second part, when you talked about putting a name, can you explain a little bit more about what kind of name, how full of a name, a shortcut, whatever?
Yeah, great question. So for software, again, I've worked for 20 plus years for Adobe, so I've got some bias there. What I like about the Adobe software is it does support these industry standards that have been around for like 40 some years. So they have a good record there. So a couple of options in different categories. The first couple are Adobe products. Adobe Lightroom, it's incredibly fast and does a really good job. What some people won't like about it is it's a subscription product, so it's $10 a month. If you'd rather to just buy your software once and be done with it, Photoshop Elements, it's another Adobe product, but you can normally get it for about $69 or $89. You buy it once, own it forever. It also supports the standard keywords and stuff. It's not quite as fast as Lightroom for the batch stuff, but it works well. Adobe Bridge is a third option. Again, these are Adobe products, but what's nice about Bridge is it's not as fast in terms of the batch stuff, but it is free. So it doesn't offer facial recognition, things like that could speed your process, but it's completely free, and these are all available for Mac and Windows computers. So that's kind of a cool option. Another option that I like would be Camera Bits Photo Mechanic. It's very powerful, it's very fast. It's not quite as intuitive to use. It's a little bit more of a technical application, but it is also a one-time purchase. I think it's about $150 one-time purchase, and it supports all the standards very well, and it's commonly used by like newspaper photographers and things like that. So that would probably be the other big one that people would use. Yeah. So there's a few ideas about software, and then names. Yeah, let's talk about names. So names are interesting. My father's birth certificate says Warren. He goes by Pete. And it's not even like his middle name isn't even Peter. It's just a weird nickname, totally unrelated to his given name. So I mention that because assigning names is a surprisingly complicated topic. If you really get into it, my suggestion is to be precise. So what I mean by that is don't say Betty or Uncle Jim or I had an Uncle Peanut. That was not his legal name, but that was his nickname. I wouldn't put Uncle Peanut. That's that's kind of a personal name. So I always put somebody's like legal name. So Catherine Jones instead of Katie, because right now when she's young I might call her Katie, but when she's an adult she might go by Catherine. And long term, the further we get away from the photos, the more we're going to be interested in like the precise, complete legal name, almost from a genealogy perspective. The last thing I'll say about names is you can put multiples. So to be honest with you, my Uncle Peanut, I don't even know his real name. He was like a kind of like a second uncle or something. I don't know his legal name. So I would find out his legal name. I'd put that in there. But because everybody called him Uncle Peanut, I'd put Uncle Peanut in there. And I could search by both. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. So you can almost do like synonyms, like proper names and nicknames. And that reminds me to tell you that the whole reason you want to add any of this information is for searching. So just put what you're going to intuitively search in there. You don't have to put everything. Like if there's a beach ball in the photo, but it's not important, don't put the word beach ball, put Hawaii because you were on vacation, right? Put the important parts. So is that helpful, Beth?
Yeah, I think that answered it. If anyone else wanted to follow up with that, put that in the chat. There is one other question in the chat though.
Yeah, I see that. That's a great one. So are photos in folders? They are. I'll show you that in a moment, kind of how I organize them. And it's kind of a matrix. If you can see my screen, it's kind of like this overlapping grid. On one hand, the files themselves, the JPEGs or whatever it is you get from your camera, they have to live somewhere in your computer, on your hard drive, right? So they're going to be in files, in folders, and probably subfolders, because my average photo organizing client has 45,000 photos. My biggest client has had about 8.5 million. That's a lot of files. So you wouldn't want to put all of those in one folder. That'd be cruel and unusual punishment, right? You wouldn't like that. So organizing them into subfolders does make sense. And I do that by date, and I'll show you how. But then in addition to the folders, the keywords is what makes that more searchable. Folders you can browse and you can look through, but the keywords really make it searchable. And I think that's really where the magic happens.
There is a question actually in the Q&A.
Oh yeah, got it.
Lightroom Classics. I do want to remind people, if you want to put in a question, it's much easier for us to see it in chat than in Q&A. So please use the chat. But Adam, go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, you bet. So great question, Judy. I appreciate that. So I do use Lightroom Classic. There are two flavors, kind of two versions of Lightroom. Adobe Marketing has not made this complete as clear as I wish. There's Lightroom CC. That's short for Creative Cloud. That's kind of like a cloud first, a little bit more of a hobbyist edition. And then there's Lightroom Classic. It's not the most attractive name, but Lightroom Classic is definitely what I would use for these projects. It supports all the standards. It's really the better. They're both interesting tools, but if you really care about like metadata and searching and tagging, getting it organized for long term, you would want to use Adobe Lightroom Classic. That's right. Good stuff. Well, let's do this. I don't see any other questions at the moment in either the chat pod or the Q&A, but if you have them, go ahead and put your questions in the chat pod as we go. Beth can feel free to interrupt me, and I can come back from time to time. Let's jump over to the software, because we've started with, again, kind of a conceptual understanding of how to organize, what our goals are, how to add the tags. Let's switch over to the software and actually see it in action, so you can see what I'm talking about. Alrighty, so here we are. This is Adobe Lightroom Classic, and I'll just slide this around a little bit. I can make my thumbnail smaller. This is just a sample. So a couple of years ago, our family took a little vacation out to California. We got to see San Francisco, Yosemite National Park. We visited family, kind of the usual sites. So here's what I've done just by way of explanation. I imported my digital files. In this case, they came from a memory card from my camera, but they could also, you could download them from your phone. however you take your photos, your GoPro, it could be videos, it could be scan images, it doesn't matter. And I import them into, in this case, Adobe Lightroom. And one of the features that I use in the software that I think is really important is if you look over here at the folders on the left, I use a feature in Lightroom where it will automatically sort the files into date-based folders.
Adam,
So, yeah.
you're still showing us your last screen, so we're not seeing what you're talking about.
Very strange. Okay, I appreciate that heads up. Let me... Okay, give me 1 second.
You might need to unshare your screen and then reshare again.
Yeah, let me try that. Yeah, I'm grateful for the heads up. I think Zoom has altered many things because of security concerns, and it is a little wild. Let's see if I can get this to work. So Beth, if you can give me a little bit of feedback, are you seeing like images in the middle? Are you seeing panels in the left and right, or just the thumbnails in the middle?
No, we can see the whole thing. Left and right panel, thumbnails in the...
Awesome. Good, good, good. I'm grateful for that detail. It was showing up a little funny on my end, so it's good to know. So let's try that again. What you see on the left, you should see folders by date of the different places we went each day on the trip. So I use the date-based organization. Remember, I mentioned that your digital photos from your cameras and your phones, they have a date embedded automatically. And so I'm using the software just to organize them by date. I think that's important because a photograph, by definition, is a capture of a moment in time. And so I think that is the best primary way to organize photos. You say, oh, we went on vacation in 2015, or when was my dad's retirement, or, you know, we think in terms of time. So I use that. Now, the one extra thing here is the software is not so smart to know that I was in San Francisco, Fisherman's Wharf, Muir Woods, Yosemite National Park, and Big Sur across those days. I added those kind of suffixes, so that was for my sake, that I could look at those folders and remember what was what. So I did that part, but I based it on the date-based folders. So within Lightroom, what I'm going to do is just give you a few little samples. Let me slide that over. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select a range of folders here, and I'm going to select all of the images in these folders. So you see they're all highlighted. So all of these images were taken on vacation in California. So I can come over here to the keyword area, and I'll just type those two words, vacation and California, hit return. The reason I start there is one of the principles of organizing photos that will save you a ton of time is you want to work from general to specific. So in this case, two keywords that I knew would apply to every photo would be vacation in California. So I didn't need to apply those keywords one folder at a time or one photo at a time. I could just do the whole range. There's all these days from this trip and say, hey, that's all California vacation. So even if I stopped there, right, I could just work on this for like 5 seconds and say, these are all photos from my California vacation. That might be enough, right? That was pretty quick and easy. And that's, again, the concept of working generally to specific. So start broad categories, and maybe that's good. If I want to do a little bit more, I can come in here and say, select these photos, and I might add another keyword. I might say San Francisco. And I'm just typing keywords here. And then down here in the other metadata area, this is some of the other things I talked about, like location, city, state, country, GPS, caption, creator, all the things we talked about earlier. So I could add San Francisco as a city. And again, because I have all the photos selected, it's applying that to, in this case, like 12 photos in like 1 second. It is tedious. I'm not gonna try to trick you. It's tedious work, but it's not as tedious as people think, because I can do a whole batches or whole trips or whole folders just in one pass, and I don't need to work on each individual image. So the last example, some of you may recognize this. So that's Alcatraz from Coit Tower in San Francisco. So if I select those 3 images, I can say the sublocation is Coit Tower. And so here we went from all this trip is California. This is San Francisco, this folder, and then these 3 are Coit Tower. So again, working from broad, general terms to more specific terms. And we could do the same thing. Here's the Golden Gate Bridge with the beach. Here's, let's go to Yosemite. So all of these are Yosemite. And then just these are on the mist. They call it the mist trail. So again, broad to specific, and you could do this, you could have a bunch of photos from the beach, and then, one of them had a special person in them, or, a picnic or something like that. One other aspect to this that I think is worth calling out, and then I'll come back and see if there's other questions, would be facial recognition. So Lightroom, one of the things I like about it is its facial recognition. So I can come here, click on this face, and it's already in the background. It recognized all of these faces of my family members. And I can, it doesn't know who they are yet. It just recognizes, hey, that looks like a face. And it looks like this is like a bunch of copies of the same person. So my wife's name is Cindy Pratt, and I would just type that in and click return, and I'll do that a few more times. And then here's my oldest son, Andrew. I'm typing his name. There's Emily. I'm typing in these names. Here's Josh, my other son. I'm not going to do these for all these. I'm just doing some illustrative examples. Thinks this is my wife. They do look a bit alike, so you can kind of understand why it might guess that. So I would put Catherine's name in there. So here's the cool thing. I just showed it 5 faces, a couple of each. And quickly, it is learning some of the other faces below. It doesn't mean it's perfect yet, but it's going to get smarter and smarter. So now instead of typing names for all of these, it's guessing. It says, is this Emily? And I say, it sure is. And I just click the check mark. And it says, hey, is this Cindy? Yes, check mark. Is this Emily? Yes. And then it says, it still thinks this is Cindy, but it's my daughter Emily. So it's not quite right. I can just further train it. And I'll drag this up and say, no, it's actually Emily. And when I do that, it will continue to get smarter and smarter. So it may take a few minutes to catch up, but once you've trained it on the basics, again, here it's getting a few wrong, but I'm gonna coach it, and you do that more and more, and this software is gonna get smarter and smarter, and its guesses are gonna get more and more accurate. So that, it gets down here and it's like, yep, these are all Cindy. Again, it's kind of a small sample, but when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of photos, this will save you a ton of time. And when I'm working on a big archive, I can easily tag 1,000 faces an hour, right, across thousands and thousands of photos, saving me a ton of time. And then let's go back. Let's actually clear out of this just to show you the benefit. It's like, okay, so that saves me time, but it's still kind of tedious. So here's some shots at the beach. I'll tag those. And what this allows me to do is search for the word beach and Emily. And there's a shot of Emily at the beach. So when it's time to share that, when I want to make a collage or a slideshow or a scrapbook, I can easily find those. And again, I didn't even finish tagging all of those faces, but I want to search for Yosemite and Andrew. There's a picture of Yosemite at Andrew at Yosemite. That's the searching that allows me to do instead of scrolling through hundreds or thousands of photos. So hopefully that makes sense.
We do have a question.
Yeah, do you want to read that to me?
Sure, I'd be happy to. How would you, and then actually I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How would you organize ancestor photos and name their folders? Example from the 1900s. Would you still use years, or would you do it by family? So kind of in that genealogy realm, how would you handle that?
Yep, great question. So my approach is the same. And it kind of is nice because it keeps it simple. So it doesn't mean I'm as precise, right? With a digital camera phone, it knows to the second when that photo was taken. So it's going to be right. When I scan a photo, and I'm actually scanning some photos right now for a client from the 1930s, getting the date and time to the minute, not going to happen. If all I know is that it's the 1930s, I'll put them in a folder called 1930s because that's all I know. And that's fine. If I happen to know, well, okay, she was born in 34 and this is her kindergarten picture, so that's probably 1939. Well, that makes sense. I'll put it in a folder called 1939. So I get as specific as I can without driving myself totally crazy. And I don't add what we call false specificity, right? If I don't know where it was taken or I don't know when it was taken, then I don't add it. But based on the age of the paper, different characteristics of clothing, and photo organizers, you put your detective hat on. You start looking at license plates, right? When license plates very more obviously had the year stamped on each plate, and you got a new one each year, you can get a lot of clues from photos and at least get the decade right. Based on age and clues like that. You might even get the year right. Or if you know the year and there's a Christmas wreath on the door, you're like, okay, well, that was probably December of 67 or, whatever it is. So you do the best you can. And here they're day based. Earlier up, they might be month, year, or decade, and that's okay.
Judy, let me know in the chat if that answered your question or if you have any follow-ups. In the meantime, Adam, I'm going to sort of skip you out of this a little bit.
Okay.
My question is, when you are, okay, Judy said she's good, so that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool.
My question is at the beginning. So let's say I've got, and unfortunately this is real, I've got 40,000 photos because I work on a Mac at home. So I've got 40,000 photos in my photo software inside of my Mac software.
Right.
How would I import those? Let's say I wanted to use Lightroom. How would I import those into Lightroom to even begin this process?
Yeah, great question. And that is where every project starts. And so your photos library is just one example. It might be photos library. It might be Google Photos. It might be Picasa. It might be collections of CDs, DVDs, thumb drives, memory cards, hard drives, old laptops, like the list goes on. And I've seen it all, right? That's the kind of stuff that I deal with in these projects. So you want to gather that stuff. With Apple Photos in particular, it's actually pretty simple. So you can open Apple Photos, just select all your images, just Command A on your keyboard, select all. And then there's a menu command. It says, most people overlook it because it's not used often, but there's a menu command that says File, Export, and you can just export all the unmodified originals is what you would want to use. So that just gives you the original, best, highest quality, highest resolution capture that came off your original camera or phone. And you can export those off into a folder. Now that initially is going to make a big jumbled mess. And you're like, oh, thanks, Adam. What did you do to me? So here's the good news. One is it doesn't change anything that's in Photos. It's only exporting a copy. So we've done nothing destructive. If you get to some point and you say, oh, I've made a huge mistake, you haven't lost anything. You just go back to Photos and that's okay. But it allows you to quickly extract everything from Photos. You can do the same thing with Google, by the way. Google has a website called Takeout. It's kind of a funny, like a museum, or not a museum, like a restaurant takeout thing, but it's taking out your data. So you go to takeout.google.com and you can do the same thing there, and you can download all your images from Google Photos. So you get all that stuff, but then it's just a big mess. It's all these crazy photos. What you would do then is I would use the Lightroom Import feature that I talked about, import it and say, hey, Lightroom, you take care of this for me. It's too many photos. I think you said 40,000. I can't make heads or tails of that. You do it for me. And it will sort them out all chronologically by date. And you can be more vague. If you just wanted to sort by month, that's like specific enough for your preferences, that's fine. It'll sort it by month. And then it'll kind of make heads or tails of it. And then you could go back and over time start to clean it up, delete the duplicates, things like that. that
So
help?
you would suggest exporting, and first of all, I'm assuming you would export them all into, let's say, a folder on your desktop. You're not going to export them directly into Lightroom. There's a middleman step in there.
Yep, that's
Then
right.
you would recommend a select all, export, and then import into Lightroom
Yep, that's
instead
exactly right.
instead of, say, because of course obviously they're all organized in photos. So instead of, say, exporting and then importing one album at a time.
Yeah, that would work, and it would take forever. It would be a real doozy. And because the way albums work in applications like Apple Photos, albums don't contain all your photos. So if you only did albums, you'd probably miss a lot of your photos. For people who don't use albums, um, like that's the only way, you'd have to just select all your photos. So yeah, so there's some nuances there. The other thing to keep in mind, so I'm presenting from a little laptop. It's one of these new super thin laptops. The hard drives in these are relatively small. I mean, you can get bigger ones, but they're mucho bucks, right? Most of us have laptops with pretty modest hard drive sizes. When you're dealing with a lot of data like that, like tens of thousands of photos, it can be a really good idea. I'll grab one here to just get a little external hard drive. These are not expensive. You can go to Staples or Amazon or wherever. You can get like a 1 terabyte drive for about $50. This, and frankly, don't go buy one, go buy two, because it'll be helpful to have all of this in one place. It'll have more storage space most likely than your laptop, and it'll give you some room to work. And then as you make progress, you want, and actually this is a perfect example. This is the real deal, unexpected on my desk. I don't know if you'll be able to see those labels, but that's Archive 1 and Archive 2. Every time I buy a hard drive, I buy at least two. So I've got the main one that I'm working on, and then I've got the backup. They're always in sync. They're the same size. So that, again, if this fails, or if I make a mistake or do something stupid like drop it and it breaks and it doesn't work anymore, it would be annoying, but it wouldn't be a problem because I would have my backup and I would just go replace this. So good working space, good backup strategy. If your photos are important to you and you're going to do all this work, you don't want to lose it. So make sure you back it up nicely.
Great. I don't see any other questions or comments in chat. So why don't we let you just go ahead and keep going?
Okay, that sounds great. So a few other kind of tips and tricks here that I would recommend would be, so here's like a couple of photos that I took of my wife on our anniversary dinner. She's way more attractive than I am, so I don't know if I took any pictures of me, but I might select these photos, and for the caption, celebrating the 22nd if you can't see what I'm typing there, I wrote celebrating the 22nd anniversary of Adam and Cindy Pratt. So I don't normally talk about myself in the third person, right? That's a little funny to write that way, but I write that way because someday, who knows when, I'll be dead. It happens to all of us. I don't know when, but I hope somebody will enjoy these photos again, kids, grandkids, whatever, and just having a little bit of context. Thinking about my photos 100 years from now. We've all had photos. I'll grab one here. So I'm working on a project right now. Nobody knows who this guy is. We have the photo. I'm scanning it, but we don't know who he is. I think that's a shame. There's no details. We just don't have the history. So by adding these things like names and keywords and captions, that adds some to the story. So that when somebody discovers and hands these photos down, hopefully one day, at least that's what I hope they'll do, they'll have that story there. So that's an example of how to use a caption. And one of the ways to think of a caption is, if anybody took journalism class, it's typically a one sentence, present tense statement of like the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Just basics, combining things like the date and the people and the context, some of the keywords we might have added before, just turning that into a sentence. And you don't have to do it for every photo, and it's okay. I mean, in this case, I just did it for every photo in the batch. I'm not going to write a different sentence about each one. That's crazy. And if you got the time, go nuts. But, you know, it's simple to write a simple statement, apply it to a whole batch. Or I could do the same thing here. This, you know, almost 100 photos from this vacation. I could just apply a simple keyword. You know, we took the kids on a California vacation, summer of 2018, visited parks and family, you know. So that goes well there. And then the last thing that I'll mention is I talked about a kind of a general creator. So as a professional photographer, I might add some details like a copyright statement. You know, these were copyright 2018 by Adam Pratt. But for a more informal kind of personal archive, it would be very reasonable to say from the family archive of Adam and Cindy Pratt, or something related, right? Or if they weren't your photos, maybe they're from your uncles or from your parents. You just put something relevant in there. And again, it's literally just a couple seconds to write one phrase, one sentence, apply it to all the photos. So when somebody sees that one day, it's going to make sense. And the other thing that I want to reinforce about using Lightroom, because most of you probably haven't seen Lightroom and you understand the concepts, but the screen is a little different, maybe overwhelming. Here's two things that I think are really important to understand. If I select any one of these photos, and there's a feature where I'm just going to say show in Finder, or if I was on Windows, this is cross-platform software, it's available for Mac and Windows, I could say show in Windows File Explorer. And I'll do that. And Beth, since I've switched apps, can you still see my screen?
Yes, we see what you're doing. Well,
okay.
we still see Lightroom.
Ah, okay. Instead of fidgeting with it, I'll just narrate. What's going on behind the scenes is I see this file inside of Lightroom as a thumbnail, but it's just a file on my hard drive with that file name in a folder. So it's always accessible. It's not like hidden in some special file, archive, or catalog. It's not in the cloud. It's like on my computer, just where I expect it to be. And the other thing that's nice is the keywords, like very simple. You know, I'll say trolley or train. So I apply that keyword. That keyword is now inside the file. Right? It's not just inside Lightroom, it's inside the file. Inside this JPEG is where that keyword lives now. So if I email that to somebody, if I post it online, if I post it to Facebook, if I share it on a site, as long as those support industry standards, that keyword's still there and it's going to be searchable. So if I upload this photo to a website like Flickr, which is a really popular photo sharing service, well, that works out really well because that keyword is embedded in the file, it travels with it, and it's now searchable wherever that goes. So those are just some things to think about, to be aware of about how this works, that I think are really important, that make the work that you do to organize your photos just more permanent and kind of carry through to the future, again, for yourself or for others who may inherit these photos at some point, that they can make heads or tails of them.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah, please.
In the chat room, and then I actually have a question about what you just said.
Perfect.
But first of all, the question, when you save your file, do you save it on your hard drive or on your external drive?
Good question. So, in an ideal scenario, well, how would I answer that? I guess at the risk of cop-out, I would say it depends. So, but let me explain the options. If your computer has a big enough hard drive where you can store all of your photos in one place, then that's where I would store them and work on them because that would be more convenient, right? And I don't have to have an external drive. However, most people's photo archives are pretty big. And ironically, most of our hard drives are getting smaller because we're using laptops with these tiny little hard drives. So if it doesn't all fit in one place, then I would say work on a hard drive. And then whether it's stored internally or in this external hard drive, make sure you have your second one for a backup. And at the risk of sounding totally crazy, I actually buy three. I've got my primary, I've got my secondary backup, and then I've got an off-site backup. So I make a copy of this, and every couple months I swap it out, and I keep it. You could keep it at the office or in a safety deposit box or at your mother's or whatever. And that way, in case of real catastrophe, fire, flood, hurricane, tornado, and by the way, with no exaggeration, I have had clients that have dealt with all of those disasters: fire, flood, hurricane, tornado, where they've lost their homes, they've lost everything. So it's a terrible situation. But via a $50 hard drive, it's cheap insurance that you could keep off site to keep all of that safe and never have to worry about losing it.
Okay, so Peter, let us know if that answered your question. In the meantime, I'm going to ask my question.
Yeah, please.
So, okay, so you were just talking about you can have that picture, your keywords, all your metadata are actually embedded in the picture file.
Yep.
You then share that. You put that up on Flickr or you share it up on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can other people access that information and thereby violate your privacy?
Yeah, good question. There is a possibility of that. So when I say that the data gets embedded in the file, that is true. That said, that there's two things that could be done there. Somebody could willfully delete the information, right? So there's that possibility. That'd be a pretty nerdy, weird thing to do, but they could, right? So it's not an enforcement of copyright. It's not an enforcement of privacy. It's just convenience. If somebody wanted to strip it out, they could. So that's a possibility. The other thing is, it is important if you want to share these files on other platforms, social media platforms, things like that, you want to keep in mind what kind of information you're embedding. So as an example, I think in one of the earlier screenshots, I put my home address in there, right? We live on Pershing Avenue in Wheaton, Illinois. I find that helpful, but I might want to not, export that when I share it online. Another thing that people might be concerned about is, this is my daughter, right? People have concerns about sharing photos of their children online, and I totally get it. So with that in mind, Adobe Lightroom in this case has a feature that's super helpful. So when you export photos that you might post online or share or whatever, it has some options to say, hey, include all my metadata or not, right? Maybe just include the copyright. Or you can say all metadata, but don't include people information because I don't want the names of my kids out there or my grandkids or whatever, and remove the location information. So this allows you to very easily kind of strip out the more personally identifiable information. The fact that one of these photos was shot at the Golden Gate Bridge, like, that's no secret, right? Like, there's no sense in trying to keep that secret. That is what it is. But the fact that my kids' names, maybe I don't want that out there, that's fine. And using those export controls, you can definitely kind of limit and control what gets shared.
Excellent, thank you. Peter had a follow-up question.
Yeah.
He said, I have a lot of paper photos. What are your recommendations for scanning photos?
Yeah, great questions. So Beth, let me ask you this. I've covered most of the metadata, like the organizing stuff. Would you mind if I jump over to another presentation to talk a little bit more about scanning?
No, if anyone has more questions about this particular topic, go ahead and type them in the chat now.
Yep.
But otherwise, Adam, you go ahead and answer it in the best way you think possible.
Okay, yeah, give me 1 second and I'll just load up some other slides that I think will be fun. I think it'll be helpful. Actually, what's today? Tuesday. Just yesterday, I published a new course online all about scanning. So this is super fresh in my mind. So let me go and share my screen again. Make sure this works. And is that coming through okay? Kind of some side-by-side photos?
Yeah, with the words ideal resolution on top.
Perfect. Yep. So let's talk about scanning, because I do a lot of that work and I think it's fascinating. It's pretty tedious. Most people don't think it's fun, but I enjoy it. So here's a couple things to think about in terms of scanning. let's first talk about resolution, not even devices, but just resolution. So for prints, you want to scan those at least, well, not at least, generally 600 ppi is your goal. You could scan higher resolution, but you don't really get any more quality. It's just wasted time, and you get bigger file sizes, but there's no better quality. If you're scanning slides and negatives, that's always the better thing to scan. If you have prints and prints and negatives of the same thing, you want to scan the negative if you can, because the qualities and the color and the resolution are a lot higher. And you want to scan these higher, generally at least 3,000, hopefully 4,000 ppi would be my goal for slides and negatives. And that way you get really archival quality. You can blow them up, reprint them large. You can really have fun with them. So those are the goals. Let's talk really quickly about the comparisons. There's a bunch of phone apps out there. Don't bother with them, please. I've tested them. I actually just interacted with one of the developers on one of them today because I posted a public review about professional scanning with their phone app, and they were very gracious, but they did not like my response. The quality is just terrible. It's really no good. They're kind of free or cheap, but it just will not work well. So I would just really encourage you to not waste your time with the phone apps. There's also what I call gadget scanners. These are normally about $100. You get them online. You can find them on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. They will scan. They're marginally better than the phone apps, but the quality's not very good. The resolution is low. I wouldn't waste your time on it. You've also got scanners like all-in-one scanners, kind of a printer, fax, copy, scanner. You can get these for as low as $200. You might already have one, and that may be tempting to want to use it. The catch here is they're slow, and the quality is just not that great. They're not great pieces of equipment. Two other categories, and here's some stuff that I'm getting into gear where I would recommend and feel more comfortable with this. There are high-speed scanners. These are more expensive. They typically cost like $500 to $600. Epson has this fast photo series, and so you can stick a stack of photos in there and it'll feed them through real quickly. It's fast, it's pretty good quality. The only catch is it's limited to standard print. So if you have big stuff, if you have rigid mounted things, if you have slides and negatives, it's not going to work for that. And these can be a little temperamental. Just because there's more moving parts, it's going to require more cleaning, a little bit of futzing, but the results are pretty darn good. Flatbed scanners are also great. The quality can be very good. You can do multiple formats with this. You can do prints, slides, negatives. The downside is it can be pretty slow, and the cost, you can get a nice scanner for $200. You can go up to about $1,000. But that's probably a pretty good option. You can get like an Epson flatbed for like $200. You can get pretty far with that. Three other options. This is a little more out there, but if you have a lot of film and slides, there are dedicated film scanners. These are pretty hard to, well, there are some newer models. Generally about $1,000 is what you'll pay, and they only work for film and slides. They're really high quality, but they're super slow. The last two options, I do everything with professional camera scanning. So this is like the best of everything. It's super high quality, high resolution, high speed. I can shoot any format. The downside is the equipment is quite expensive and it requires a lot of skill. So you go spend a couple $1,000s. This only makes sense if you're doing this professionally or have a really big collection. But this is one option. And then some people may be familiar with drum scanners. I put this in there more for entertainment than anything. But the equipment, if you can even find it anymore, is generally the cost of a nice car, like $10,000 to $60,000. And if you just want to outsource it, you can pay $50 to $500 per scan. It's pretty stiff, pretty expensive, not very realistic. It's very good quality, but kind of outdated. So those are some options. I'll just bring this up. These are just kind of a summary slide that you might think about some options. So I know that was a super long answer to a short question, but hopefully it was helpful for everybody to think through those. And it is a super common question I get.
And to jump in real quick, obviously the library building is closed at the moment, but when we do reopen, we have the high quality flatbed scanner that is available for use in what we call our conversion room. So once the building reopens, you can check with us to see what the, how you get into that room. I'm not going to go into that here, but we do have that high quality flatbed scanner for use. You don't need to have a library card. So once we open back up, you can come in and use ours for
That's
free.
cool. Yeah. And so Beth, you guys have that. So those scanners, if I remember correctly, those are going to support print, slides, and negatives, right? You have like the slide negative attachments.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Good stuff. Any other questions in the chat pod?
There's nothing currently in there.
Okay, cool. Well, that's most of what I was hoping to cover. Beth, if you've got other questions or stuff that you remember that's come up in other sessions, I'd be happy to entertain those. Again, if our attendees have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat pod. We can address those before we wrap, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen for now. And I hope that's been helpful.
From what I remember before, some of the biggest questions were around metadata, and I think you really covered all of that really well.
Okay.
It was very helpful to see you have Lightroom open and to see you work in it. I thought that was very helpful. One of the other questions or sort of areas that I remember people asking about, one are kind of, well, but my photos are in Google Photos and what's wrong with that? And the other one was that idea of gathering and all the different places and ways that you might have photos.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me see if I can pull up a slide here real quick that might help with that. Yeah, let's do this. Let me share my screen one more time. And are these guys in all these 70s clothes? Is that coming through?
Yes, that's what we're
awesome.
seeing.
So here's a gathering of another sort, but let's talk about that gathering phase a little bit. And this will focus mostly on digital. And I actually have some handouts. I forgot, Beth, we normally give handouts. If you guys want to email me, I'll send you the handouts we normally give out. I'll send you out a PDF of what we normally give out in the room, but I have two handouts. One is gathering digital photos, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. And then I have another handout about gathering physical photos. These are just like reminders and lists of places you might look as you gather all this stuff. But let's talk about gathering digital photos. So there's a couple of places I suggest everybody look to start. Computer is the most obvious place. That's where most of your photos are going to be, somewhere on a hard drive. Might be in different places, but start with the computer. Don't forget phones and tablets, and not just the phones you use now, but the phones you retired. Sometimes they're still sitting around, they're broken, the screen's cracked, whatever, but you haven't gotten rid of them, but you might have forgotten to migrate the photos over, so check those. You may have external hard drives, backup drives from other computers, whatever. You've also probably got memory cards, and don't forget not just the ones in the drawer, but like don't forget the memory card that's still in the camera, because that could still be sitting around with, it's a little embarrassing, but that could still have last year's vacation photos on them that you never even got to download. So check for those. We also went through a phase in the early 2000s where we stored a lot of photos on CDs and DVDs. It feels a little antiquated now. Most people don't do that much anymore, but you may have big stacks of those sitting around, so check for those. And then, Beth, you were alluding to this, like all the different websites. I've got stuff on iPhoto and iCloud and Google Photos and Amazon Photos and Shutterfly and Snapfish and Walgreens and on and on and on. So go to those website accounts, remember those passwords as best as you can, download the stuff from those services, and that would be part of that gathering that then I would put that big old messy pile on one of these hard drives and then import that by date into Lightroom to start to make sense of it. And just for fun, when I go visit a client, haven't done that in a while. It's been very hands off, but people have a box of, actually, I just visited a client last week. I visited her porch. She had all of her devices and gadgets and hard drives and stuff, video reels and whatnot in a big box on the porch with some notes. We talked from afar with a mask. we talked about this stuff, and then I brought it back to my office, and this is like a digital gathering toolkit that I use for all my projects, where basically I've got a cable for everything, and you probably have a junk drawer like this in the kitchen, like your iPhone cable and the old iPhone cable and like all these different formats and whatnot. So you'll need these. You might need to find an old power cord. You might need to find the old hard drive cord and whatnot to be able to connect everything to your computer, but get all that at one place, commandeer the dining room table a little bit, because very few people are having guests and dinner parties at the moment. So you can reclaim some workspace. And these are some of the things that I use to do that gathering process.
All right, I'm not seeing, there was someone, Judy typed in a question, but you answered it.
Okay.
So that's all good. And then Laura wanted to know about this being recorded. So I just wanted to let everybody know that all of our remote programs are recorded. And then if you go to our website, gepl.org, right on that home page under programs and events, there's a page called Did You Miss It? Now, it might take 3 or 4 days for it to get up there, but all of our remote programs are put on that Did You Miss It page in reverse chronological order. So the most recent ones are at the front, and then you can page back. So if you missed this, or if you want to check back in and say, wait, what did he say about that? Or if you have friends who might be interested in it, you can go to that page. Again, it's on the gepl.org home site, right at the top under Programs and Events. Did you miss it? And this entire recorded program will be up there. And
Awesome. So Beth, it looks like you got muted there. Oh, yeah, it looks like you got muted there for a second.
Yeah, I took my hand off of my space bar. But so it will be available there. The PDFs, Adam, at the very end, are you going to give your contact information? So if people want those PDFs, they can have access to your contact
absolutely. Can I just mention that? And I could even put it in the chat pod too. Yeah, so if you want me to email you the, sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. It's a trick. There we go. Got to get my own company name right. Didn't think that would be so hard. So if you want me to email you copies of the handouts we normally give, I'll be happy to email you a PDF of that. Again, one is a list of places to look for digital photos, and one is a place to look for physical photos just for the gathering phase. So you can email me at my email address, adam@chaos2memories.com. And I've also got, let me pull up.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second,
Yeah,
Adam.
please.
It looks like your chat box is set to all panelists. You need to change it to all panelists and attendees.
Yes.
We can't see.
Thank you. That's better. Let's do that. Is that better?
Yes, that looks better.
Awesome. And then one other thing to mention is I'll also put a URL in there. So on my website, there is a page. It's a little bit hidden, but there's a page where if you're interested in some of the tools and stuff that I create, you can sign up to receive a free copy of what I call my workflow guide. So I talked about those phases of gather, preserve, organize, and so on. If you want like more detail on that, I think it's about an 8-page PDF. It's a ton of detail, and you can write notes and keep it for yourself. And it goes into detail on some of those other phases that we didn't talk about, scanning, resolution, all that kind of stuff. So you can download that from there, and that might be helpful as well. So.
And I do want to mention that if you are going to come back and relook at this, or you're going to tell your friends to look at this recording, they will not see the chat box when they're watching the recording. So if you want this email or you want this URL, please grab it now. And worst comes to worst, you can always email me at the library, Elizabeth Clower at the library. You can find me through the gepl.org website, and I can always then refer you back to Adam.
Perfect. Good catch. Good stuff. Well, Beth, thank you for making this happen. I appreciate connecting with everybody, and I'm glad that they could attend. It's unusual times, but trying to be as normal as we can in the midst of it. And frankly, I have a lot of folks who have more time on their hands than usual, and so they're finding time to sort photos and find things that they've been meaning to do for a long time, and they're finally getting time to do it. And I will say one of my, so chaostomemories.com is my website, but one of the other domain names I own is iwilldoitonday.com, because that's what everybody tells me. They're gonna organize their photos one day. So maybe this is the day.
That's wonderful. That's actually really funny. I want to thank you very, very much. This is helpful. I've seen this 3 or 4 times, but I have to say every time I see it, I learn something new. And I am one of those people with 40,000 photos on my laptop. So I appreciate it. I don't see any last minute questions coming in. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to type. But unless I see any other last questions coming in, Adam, thank you very, very, very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And for those of you who attended, don't worry. We tend to do this program on a regular basis at the library. So look for it again, probably in about 6 months. I haven't actually talked to Adam about that, but I'm roping him in right here.
That'd be great.
And thank you all very much for showing up.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.